Now remarks from Senators Lindsey Graham and Charles Schumer at the American-Israel Public Affairs Committee's annual policy conference, known as AIPAC. This is 50 Minutes.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome AIPAC National Board Member Barry Manis.
Good evening. Welcome, honored guests and AIPAC activists. This evening, it is my honor to introduce Senator Lindsey Graham, a personal friend and a true friend of Israel and the Jewish people. As a member of the U.S. Air Force, the South Carolina Air National Guard, and now the Air Force Reserves, Senator Graham has seen firsthand the threats that Israel and the United States both face emanating from the Mideast. In fact, Senator Graham, known as Colonel Graham in the Air Force JAG Corps, is the only veteran of the Iraq War currently serving in the United States Senate. And he still does his reserve duty in Iraq and Afghanistan each year. Throughout his years of service in both the House and the United States Senate, Senator Graham has encouraged Republican and Democratic administrations alike to stand with Israel in her quest for security and peace. With his clarity of purpose and words, he has been outspoken against the Arab world's refusal to recognize Israel. And with his unique, characteristic insistence on calling them as he sees them, Lindsey Graham has demanded an end to efforts to delegitimize Israel in the international arena. And as a military lawyer himself, he speaks with expertise in defending the manner in which Israel defends herself. But Lindsey Graham does not stop at just words. 2 years ago, when terrorists from the Hamas-controlled Gaza Strip were endlessly firing rockets onto southern Israel, Senator Graham went to visit Sderot himself, the largest town that was directly in the line of fire. There, that day, he pledged his personal support for the safety and security of Israel's citizens, and he lauded, quote, the spirit of Israeli determination in the face of constant terror. He knows the threats that Israel faces every day, and that's why he has pushed so hard for strong U.S.-Israel cooperation in developing missile defense systems, whether it be the long-range Arrow missile or the shorter-range David's Sling. And when it comes to the greatest threat facing Israel and America today, the specter of a nuclear-armed Iran, Senator Graham is constantly looking for the next action that he can take, whether urging the administration to quickly move forward with crippling sanctions, or seeking to penalize companies that provide technology facilitating this theocratic regime's repression of its own people. In every arena, Senator Graham has demonstrated his strong and lasting commitment to the U.S.-Israel friendship. And on top of all of that, Senator Graham has joined with his Democratic colleague, Senator Chuck Schumer of New York, to circulate a letter urging President Obama to immediately impose sanctions against Iran. Tomorrow, when we all, the thousands of us, head up to Capitol Hill we will be lobbying for that letter to be signed by the senators of the United States. We feel so fortunate to have Senator Graham's leadership in the Senate, his friendship, and his presence here tonight. So please join me in welcoming, from the great state of South Carolina, my friend, Israel's friend, Senator Lindsey.
And music sounds like the Ten Commandments. That's pretty cool. Well, thank you, Barry, for a very kind introduction. And back home, I would say he laid it on pretty thick, so I got a lot to live up to. Thanks for having me here tonight. This is the annual AIPAC dinner that begins on Monday and apparently is going to end on Tuesday. So I'll try to pick up the pace a little bit here. But when Barry told me, yeah, for those who need to go to the restroom, right? Well, the more you drink, the better I sound. But when Barry told me that I was going to be the speaker and it was an all-Senate night, I knew it'd be long, but I was honored. How many people here are going to Capitol Hill tomorrow to lobby? Okay. If you think it doesn't matter, you're wrong. It matters. Go to your senator or your congressman, people you can vote for, and make your voice heard. The most effective way to lobby a member of the Senate or the House is to show up and let them know that you live in their state or their district and you care. They will listen. It's not money, it's people that matters. Now, we've done this once before, but would every member of Congress, would every Democrat, every Republican stand just for 5 seconds? Stand. On behalf of every person standing, to our friends in Israel, to AIPAC, the Congress has your back. We will not let you down. Republicans, Democrats, Joe Lieberman, who's both a Republican and a Democrat and an independent, we have your back. And if you want to know how wide and deep this support for Israel runs, I'm a Baptist Republican from South Carolina. The next speaker is a Jewish senator from New York, Chuck Schumer. That's as wide as it gets. You could put the whole planet in the middle. But we're here tonight to speak with one voice. And you don't have much of that going on in Washington now, do you? If you're watching television, you wonder if we've all lost our minds, and some days I wonder too. So it's good to be here tonight to celebrate something that we all agree on, and that's our support for Israel. Tonight's a celebration. Tonight's not about health care. It's not about immigration. It's about our national security. It's about our best friend in the world, the state of Israel. It's about those things that unite us. And I say that with no animosity to anyone else, any other group. I say that with no animosity to the Palestinian people. I share your hopes and dreams. All I ask is you recognize that Israel has a place on the planet. Now, some of you may have come here tonight because of a recent dust-up. I'm not going to get political, and I'm not going to overly dwell on the recent conflict we've had. But let's say this, and let's say it loud, and let's say it clear. Friends disagree. That's part of being friends. They call it marriage. The one thing that will make a strong friendship and a good marriage is to disagree quietly. So that those who wish you ill, who do not have your common interest at heart, will not be empowered. Ladies and gentlemen, Howard said it best. Jerusalem is not a settlement. No government in Israel will ever look at Jerusalem as a settlement. No government in the United States should ever look at Jerusalem as a settlement. It is the undivided capital of the State of Israel. It is the eternal home of the Jewish faith. And it is now time to move on to other issues. I want to talk very quickly about the world as we wish it to be. As we celebrate tonight, let's embrace in our hearts the world that we all wish it to be. A world where there's no rockets from Gaza, no Hezbollah attacks from the north, where Palestinian children go to school without being taught hate. That's the world we wish it to be. An Iran controlled by its people, not some theocracy. An Iran governed by someone other than a Holocaust denier. That's the world we wish it to be. An Iran pursuing peaceful nuclear power, not a nuclear weapon. A world where moderate Muslims are celebrated, not condemned and killed. An Afghanistan where a young girl never fears the soccer stadium, but can go to school and achieve her dreams. A free and independent Iraq where Sunnis, Shias, and Kurds can settle their differences at the ballot box and through the rule of law and be an inspiration to the Mideast. A UN, a United Nations that can actually control thugs and dictators. A United Nations that would never issue the Goldstone report. That's the world as we wish it to be. This is the world as it is. And if you don't know the difference, then the world is a dangerous place. I know the difference between the world as we wish it to be and the world as it is. The world as it is a divided Palestinian people, a place that allows rockets to be launched from apartment buildings, a place where mosques are weapon storage sites, a place where school children are taught hate. That's the world as it is. Iran, a theocracy that kills its own children. Iran, a nation whose president questions whether or not the Holocaust actually existed. That's the world as it is, ladies and gentlemen. I've got one simple idea. If you're a nation that wants to pursue nuclear power, there should be an application. And if the president of that nation denies the existence of the Holocaust, that should be the end of the application process. The world as it is, Russia and China are AWOL when it comes to Iran. It's important to have a good relationship with Russia and China, but it's equally important that Russia and China help the world deal with the threat of a nuclear-armed Iran. That's the world as it is. Ladies and gentlemen, here's the world as it must be. We must never allow anyone to drive a wedge between the State of Israel and the United States of America. It must be so. Israel's right to exist must be acknowledged by every group in every corner of the world. That's the way the world must be to move forward. We must not allow this Iranian theocracy to develop a nuclear weapon. It's not enough to be determined. We have to say without any hesitation, it will not happen. All options must be on the table. You know exactly what I'm talking about. The question is, do the people we're talking to understand what I'm talking about? I've been in the military as a support person. I've never been a combat troop walking down the streets of Iraq and Afghanistan, but I've been in theater. I know that war is a terrible thing. It takes the lives of people at the prime of their life, and when you talk about war, you should never talk about it with a smile on your face. But I do know this, that sometimes It's better to go to war than it is to allow the Holocaust to develop a second time. It is not lost upon me what would happen if military force had to be used against Iran. I hope and pray that is not the option that we have to seek. I hope and pray that other options will work. But as Barry indicated, time is not on our side. Here's the question for this group. Is this the last AIPAC meeting before Iran has a nuclear weapon? 14 months from now, we meet again. I don't know the answer to that question, but I do know this. Time, ladies and gentlemen, is not on our side. It is not fair to put this ally of ours, the State of Israel, its Prime Minister and its government on both sides of the aisle under the burden of having to deal with this issue alone. That's not good for the world. It's not good for Israel. And I'm often asked, would a military strike as the last option be effective against the Iranian nuclear threat? My belief is a military strike stopping the Iranian government from having a nuclear weapon is more effective than trying to deal with the Iranian government after they have one. And if military force is ever employed, it should be done in a decisive fashion. The Iranian government's ability to wage conventional warfare against its neighbors and our troops in the region should not exist. They should not have one plane that can fly or one ship that can float. We have time, but time is not on our side. The UN Security Council has an opportunity to act. I hope and pray they do. Russia and China has a chance to change the course of history. Hope they will understand that a nuclear-armed Iran is just as much a threat to them as it is us or Israel or any other tolerant person or group. Ladies and gentlemen, these are consequential times. This is the time to show determination and resolve in the face of extremism. We are at war as a nation. September 11, 2001, everything changed about our country. We're almost 9 years down the road, and some of us, I think, have gotten too short of a memory. We're at war, and we have to fight this war within our values. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the mastermind of 9/11, should not be in civilian court in New York City. If he is not an enemy combatant worthy of military commission trial, who would be? I think a lot of Democrats and Republicans believe that thought. We are at war, and we must win this war. We must see it through in Iraq, and we must get it right in Afghanistan. President Barack Obama is my president. I am here to say tonight I stand by him. I stood by him in Afghanistan. I will stand by him as he draws our troops down in Iraq in a responsible way. And if it ever comes necessary to use military force or any other strong engagement tactic against Iran, I will stand by my president, and I ask you to stand by him. I ask you to pray for him. I have a lot of differences with President Obama, but can you imagine being President of the United States in these times? This man has a very hard job. We can have our fusses and we can have our fights, and this week on health care we're going to have a hell of a fight. But when it comes to national security, no Democrat in this room is my enemy. You're my opponent on the political battlefield, but you're my brother and you're my sister. We're all Americans. I can promise you one thing, that the people we fight in faraway places with strange sounding names could really care less the political differences between Chuck Schumer and Lindsey Graham. They hate us both equally. Many of you may be that way. But our enemy doesn't distinguish between our political differences. They hate us because we will accept differences. They hate us because we will allow on the streets of South Carolina a mosque, a synagogue, and a Baptist church. That we will stand up for each other. They hate us more than they love life. Ladies and gentlemen, people asked Ronald Reagan, how does the Cold War end? He said, we win, they lose. How does the war on terror end? We win, they lose. And when I say we, I mean moderate Muslims who have been slaughtered by Al-Qaeda and Islamic extremists. No group has suffered more than people in the Muslim world trying to be tolerant. By we, I mean Jews and Gentiles, Buddhists, agnostic, vegetarians, you name it. I mean anybody that believes in tolerance and support for their fellow man. One last thought. This is 2010, and we're wondering what to do with a country whose president denies the Holocaust. We do what we have to do to make sure there is no second Holocaust. Ladies and gentlemen, we gather tonight with one simple message, and never let it be misunderstood by the enemies that we commonly face. Our message tonight to the world, to the people in Israel, to the young men and women serving overseas on our behalf, never again. God bless you. God bless the people of Israel. God bless the United States. God bless all those who believe in peace and tolerance.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome AIPAC National Board Member Bob Cohen.
Friends, take your seats. Wherever Congress can affect the U.S.-Israel relationship, the senior senator from New York is never far away. Throughout his 11-year tenure in the Senate, and before that, in his 18 years as a House member from Brooklyn, Senator Charles Schumer has advanced the U.S.-Israel alliance in countless ways by introducing and passing legislation, co-sponsoring bills, drafting letters, soliciting votes, speaking on the Senate floor, and much, much more. Navigating a bill through the Senate is no easy task these days, as everyone here knows. With Senator Schumer's leadership in the past year, critical Iran sanctions legislation made it out of the Senate Banking Committee where he sits. But he did not stop there. He insisted on adding an amendment that penalizes companies that provide the Iranian government with internet jamming equipment. This provision makes it more difficult for the Iranian regime to crack down on its citizens. Then, as the #3 Democrat in the Senate leadership, he worked closely with Majority Leader Harry Reid to get the Iran sanctions bill to the floor and secure its passage. As for U.S. security assistance to Israel, Senator Schumer has consistently made sure that aid to Israel passed the Senate and became law. In addition, he has spoken out to both Republican and Democratic presidents, urging them to adhere to the negotiating principles that have led to Arab-Israeli peace treaties in the past. And he has told Saudi officials right here in Washington that after 62 years of isolating Israel, now is the time to recognize the Jewish state and welcome it as a neighbor in the Middle East. And finally, Senator Schumer, along with Republican Senator Lindsey Graham, has taken the lead in circulating a Senate letter urging President Obama to immediately impose tough, meaningful sanctions against Iran. Tomorrow, when we head to Capitol Hill, we will ask the rest of the Senate to sign on. It is clear that Senator Schumer cares deeply about the issues that matter to us most and is uniquely positioned to advance those issues in the U.S. Congress. Please join me in welcoming a longtime champion of the U.S.-Israel relationship, my friend, our friend, Senator Charles Schumer.
Bob Cohen. Thank you, Chaverim. Thank you for being here. You are all great friends of Israel. And I am proud to add, Bob, you are a great friend of mine. I also want to thank Howard Kaur, who I heard gave a great speech this morning. One of his many talents, Esther Kurtz, for the hard work that helps make AIPAC just about the most effective political organization in America. Thank you. Now, it's an honor to be here tonight. I want to extend a warm welcome to everyone, but particularly the 700 New Yorkers in attendance. New York, thank you. The 1,200 students from 360 schools, 125 from New York. And thank you for showing your support for the State of Israel. I also want to acknowledge the next speaker. I'm sort of just the warm-up act for the Prime Minister, Bibi Netanyahu. Let me tell you a little story about Bibi, which shows his passion, shows him. Back in the late 1980s, when he was Israeli ambassador and I was in the Congress, to our place for a dinner after Shabbat. My wife put together an incredible spread from our local deli: pastrami, corned beef, knishes, chopped liver, rugula, derma, you name it, the works. Now, at one point in the dinner, somebody asked me, the ambassador, can you please explain to us the state of the Israeli economy and the role of price controls, which were then in effect? So Bibi says, well, tell you what, I'll show you. He then reaches over and picks up a 2-liter bottle of Pepsi. He takes off the cap, puts his thumb in the mouth of the bottle and starts shaking it up. I mean, he really shakes it. The Israeli economy, he said, is like this bottle of Pepsi. It looks quiescent. It looks stable. But once you take your thumb out, and sure enough, when he took his thumb out, the bottle exploded everywhere. 2 liters of Pepsi on the ceiling, on all our guests, everywhere. Our drapes were soaked. There was soda everywhere. It cost us $1,800 to clean up the mess. $1,800. So, Bibi, as my wife is always reminding me, you owe us $1,800 will accept personal checks or shekels. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you're at a crucial time here in Israel's history, and you know, we say that every year. But every year, it's true. Such is the nature of Israel's constant struggle for survival. It shouldn't have to be after all these years, but it is. In just the past 2 weeks, Israel has seen an alarming violence arise over tensions in East Jerusalem, rockets from Gaza continuing to shower Sderot, another declaration of Iran's aggressive nuclear ambitions, internal political disagreements, criticism from the international community. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is just 2 weeks in the life of Israel, the only nation in the world whose every action, every statement, every policy is magnified, is sliced, is diced, and held to a rarefied standard of perfection. Israel, we all know, is not perfect. But as any elected official will tell you, in this modern world, when you strive to do the right thing, you open yourself up to much more criticism than if you don't even consider doing the right thing in the first place. Too many, far too many, in the media would rather criticize Israel for the 5% that it does wrong than turn its focus to the failings of the Palestinian community and governments, because expectations there are so low. It's unfair, it's wrong, but as we know, that's the world Israel lives in and we live in. We have to live with it. Sure, like every other country, Israel has its imperfections, but we all too often take for granted the fact that Israel is in so many ways a remarkable and resilient country, a realization of the vision of Isaiah, a light unto the nations. It is the light of democracy that has maintained its core principles in the face of 62 years of war, conflict, and daily aggression from its neighbors. Like America, freedom of speech, assembly, and press are embedded in the very fabric of Israel's society. And these are just a few of the values that hold our two countries so close. It is the light of a Jewish homeland that has provided refuge to millions of immigrants, huddled masses from Europe, North Africa, the Middle East, the former Soviet Union, Ethiopia, and beyond. It is the light of innovation, a nation whose 5 million citizens, just 5 million, have given the world countless life-changing technological and medical advances, and who have been awarded 9 Nobel Prizes in the process. It is the light of humanitarianism, a nation that's provided aid to 140 countries in the world, small little Israel. Whenever there's a crisis, you see her men and women helping those who are afflicted. In Haiti, in Rwanda, in India, in Argentina, in Turkey, El Salvador, Ethiopia, and Bosnia. It is the light of civil liberties, a nation where minorities are protected under the law by a fair and independent judicial system. A nation whose parliament, the Knesset, sits on a hilltop, much like America's Capitol Hill, and has 13 current Arab members. It is a light of a nation desperately seeking peace that it has wanted and not found since its beginning. Yes, Israel's a remarkable and resilient country, but of course it faces grave challenges every year. Challenges it cannot and must not face alone. Today, the #1 challenge was mentioned by my friend and colleague Lindsey Graham, the challenge of a nuclear Iran. Let me tell you a brief story. It's another one involving the Prime Minister. Last September, Prime Minister Netanyahu came to Capitol Hill and met with the joint leadership, Democrat and Republican, Senate and House, to talk about Iran. He described the existential threat posed by a nuclear Iran to Israel. He told us that the Iranian government provides the training, the weapons, the funds that sustain Hezbollah and Hamas. He showed us they wanted nothing less than to dominate the Middle East. He told us that Israel had a mortal fear of a nuclear-armed Iran. and that everything must be done to prevent that from happening. A lot of people around the table understood the Prime Minister's concerns, but questioned his sense of urgency. Well, what's the rush, they said. Let's be careful here. Iran, they're just saber-rattling. Don't worry, nothing bad will happen. Let's just continue these diplomatic talks. As this chorus grew louder, I watched the look on the Prime Minister's face. As he grew more and more uneasy, his face tightened. And so I spoke up. I said to my colleagues, of course, the vast majority of whom were not Jewish, why those of us who want to avoid a nuclear Iran are so passionate about acting now. I told them that there were many Jews in America in the 30s, many of whom were in positions of influence, some of whom were in Congress. Hitler was a rising danger. His hatred of the Jewish people was well known. He had even detailed in print his plan to annihilate the Jewish people. But too many people in the American establishment said, be careful, Hitler's just saber-rattling. Mein Kampf, just rhetoric. Don't worry, nothing bad will happen. Unfortunately, to our shame, the American Jewish community largely sat back in the 30s. The establishment's argument, don't worry, nothing bad will happen, won out. Even Saul Bloom, a leading Jewish congressman, a senior member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, helped tamp down the fears. And of course, we paid the worst price any people can pay. 6 million of our brethren, 1 million of our children, murdered in cold blood. And ever since then, the Jewish people have vowed, never, never again. The current president of Iran, his analogies, the analogies to the 30s, are stunning. He too denies the very existence of the Holocaust. He denies the murder of 6 million of our brethren. He wants nothing more than to see the homeland of the Jewish people, Eretz Yisrael, wiped off the planet. This is not just isolated, crazy talk from some two-bit terrorist or anti-Semitic extremist. This is venomous hate speech from a head of state who seeks to transform Iran into the dominant military force in the whole Middle East. When there are fears and plausible scenarios that the Jewish people could be in mortal danger, we must never repeat the complacency of the 30s. We must never, never again. I told my colleagues that is what motivates Prime Minister Netanyahu. I told him it's what motivates me. And at the end of the speech, Bibi came over and hugged me and said, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we cannot, we must not, we will not allow Iran to obtain a nuclear weapon. We cannot, we must not, we will not turn a blind eye as Iran builds clandestine nuclear reactors and rejects all deals to limit uranium enrichment and thumbs its nose at the IAEA. Can we really call this saber-rattling when they're on the edge of developing the most awesome and deadly weapons mankind has ever known? Diplomatic efforts have failed. We are too close to simply continue those efforts. I believe that when it comes to Iran, we should never take the military option off the table. But I have long argued that economic sanctions can right now be the best way to choke Iran's nuclear ambitions. It is important to remember this about Iran. It is not a stable country. In many ways, it's like a triangle perched on a point. Its people like democracy. They like America. They're Western. Do you know what the most popular television show is in Iran? And the young people? get American and Western television because they hide their antennas in their air conditioner ducts and the regime can't stop them. Well, the most popular show is not Al Jazeera. It's not even CNN. It's American Idol. No accounting for taste. The Iranian people crave economic advancement more than anything else. They are not a poor country, but a middle-class country. Average income in Iraq, $2,600. Average income in Iran, $8,000. If the Iranian people are prevented from seeing economic progress, they're far more likely to take to the streets in an attempt to throw off the yoke of this oppressive, brutal governing regime. Now, some sanctions should be imposed multilaterally. We have a better chance to do that. President Sarkozy, who, as you know, is part Jewish, Chancellor Merkel, are much more focused on the Iranian threat than their predecessors, Chirac and Schroeder, who did nothing. But Russia and China, both UN Security Council members with veto power, constantly drag their feet. China, one of the biggest investors in Iran's energy sector, $80 billion, has a particularly strong interest in delaying sanctions. That is why, once and for all, the U.S. must hit Iran first on our own with unilateral sanctions, no matter what the other nations of the world do. And we cannot wait. We must push those sanctions now. There is no time to wait. Iran is on the verge of becoming nuclear, and we cannot and must not afford that. Both the Senate and the House have put together strong bipartisan sanction packages that will send a clear message to Iran and the world community that America means business. A centerpiece of this legislation is the Iran Refined Petroleum Sanctions Act, sponsored by Senators Lieberman, Kyle, Bai, and myself. Although Iran is replete with oil, as you know, they have trouble refining it. They import 45% of their gasoline. The Iranian people have a lot of cars. They want and need gasoline. Our bill says that any country that exports gasoline to Iran or helps them refine their own is barred from doing any business with the United States. No ifs, ands, or buts. Already, European oil companies that traffic with Iran are beginning to pull out, even before our legislation is passed. So several months ago, we pushed to get this broad Senate package, which includes the petroleum bill and many other tough provisions marked up by the Banking Committee. Then we pushed to get it to the floor. Things move very slowly in the Senate these days. But we told Majority Leader Reid that the Iranian threat is an issue that demands fast action, and much to his credit, he heeded the call. He moved this legislation to the floor, and on January 28th, the Comprehensive Iran Sanctions, Accountability and Divestment Act passed the Senate unanimously. Now, we are in the process of reconciling the Senate and House versions of the legislation so we can get this bill on the President's desk. And then the minute the President signs it, we should not tarry. He must put the sanctions into effect immediately. We cannot wait. Now this week, Senator Graham, who you just heard from, and I will send a bipartisan letter to President Obama urging immediate implementation of the comprehensive Iran sanctions legislation when it becomes law, including the sanctions on countries that export gasoline to Iran. We cannot afford to wait for Russia or China. When you meet with your senators tomorrow, which I know you're doing, please ask every one of them to stand with Israel, to stand with world peace, to stand against a nuclear Iran, and co-sign our letter to the President. Now, I know that Iran is Israel's #1 focus. But of course, there are many other issues before us. Like you, I am deeply concerned about the security of Eretz Yisrael. Let me be clear. A majority of Israelis want peace and a two-state solution. Prime Minister Netanyahu wants peace and a two-state solution. AIPAC wants peace and a two-state solution. I want peace and a two-state solution. Now, there are a lot of people of goodwill in Europe and here in the United States that have the attitude, oh, gee whiz, if only we could get the Israelis and Palestinians to the table. If only we could get them to sit down and discuss the matters rationally and calmly, of course, there'd be peace. That, unfortunately, is wishful thinking. That, unfortunately, is not the case. The gee whiz people ignore a sad but singular truth that we must constantly remind our friends. To this day, too many Arabs and too many Palestinians do not believe there should be a Jewish state in the Middle East. Let me repeat that. Too many Arabs and too many Palestinians do not believe there should be any Jewish state in the Middle East. Their view goes as follows. They say, Western Europeans treated the Jews badly for centuries. All Europeans treated the Jews badly for centuries. Anti-Semitism was a very real problem, they might say, culminating in the horror of the Holocaust. But it was Europe's problem, not ours. And yet, as recompense, the Palestinians, many of the Arabs say, the Western Europeans gave the Jews our land. Of course, this view ignores the Jewish people's long and continuing ties to the land of Israel, but that's their view, and we have to remember it. They deny Israel's legitimacy, but they know that as long as the bond between the U.S. and Israel is unbreakable, there will always be a strong, secure Jewish state in the Middle East. And so they work diligently and very, very cleverly at weakening that bond. They seek to drive a wedge between the U.S. and Israel, because doing so will delay the day when they have to sit down and talk seriously about peace. It is very important that we make clear, we as a nation, make clear to Israel, and indeed the entire world, that despite our differences, such as those displayed all too publicly last week, that nothing will ever divide Israel and America. The bond between the U.S. and Israel will be maintained regardless of the ups and downs of the peace process, regardless of the internal Israeli politics. The bond, we must remind particularly the Arab world, between the U.S. and Israel is immutable and unbreakable. Through good times and the bad, there is one other immutable, and that is you, AIPAC. AIPAC is stronger and more effective than ever. That's a very high barrier to exceed, but every year you exceed it, just as this dinner has a record number of people. AIPAC knows what to do and is unrelenting in making sure Israel is protected. For that, I thank all 7,800 of you, and I applaud you. Now let me close by telling you about my name. As some of you know, my name is a Hebrew word. Schumer comes from the Hebrew word shomer, which means guardian, watchman. My ancestors were guardians of the ghetto wall of Chortkov in Galicia. And when they came to Ellis Island, they said their name in Yiddish, Shomer, and it got written down as Schumer. To you, I say this: that name was given to me for a reason. For as long as I live, for as long as I have the privilege of serving in the Senate from New York, I will unflinchingly, unstintingly, and with all of my strength be Shomer Yisrael a guardian of Israel. Ladies and gentlemen, Am Yisroel Chai. In Israel and America, the Jewish nation lives now and forever. Thank you.